September 7th, 1940, 11 o'clock in the morning. RAF Biggin Hill, Kent. Flight Lieutenant Alan Deere pushed the control column forward as his Spitfire Mark I rolled inverted, diving away from the Messerschmitt 109 that had just put 3 cannon shells through his starboard wing. The German pilot, Oberleutnant Franz von Vera of Jagdgeschwader 3, transmitted to his wingman with barely concealed contempt. Another of these obsolete British fighters, like shooting training aircraft, von Vera had reason for confidence. The Luftwaffe's intelligence reports painted the Spitfire as a desperate stopgap, a pre-war relic soon to be overwhelmed by German technological superiority. The Messerschmitt 109 had defeated the Polish Air Force, swept the French from the skies, and now stood poised to crush the remnants of fighter command. German pilots spoke openly of the Spitfire as outdated, underpowered, and doomed. What von Vera didn't know, what none of the German pilots circling over Kent that September morning could have imagined, was that the supposedly obsolete aircraft he was chasing would still be shooting down German fighters 5 years later. Not early variants, but the latest Focke-Wulf 190As and Messerschmitt 109 Gustavs. The Spitfire would evolve, adapt, and improve until it became the longest-serving Allied fighter of the war, outlasting every German design that tried to replace it. The story of how a 1936 design humiliated every attempt by German engineers to build something better reveals the difference between brilliant engineering and genius adaptation. This is the story of the aircraft that Hitler's Air Force called obsolete, right up until the moment it shot them down. The Spitfire's birth came from desperation, wrapped in genius. Reginald Mitchell, chief designer at Supermarine Aviation, was dying of cancer when he created the fighter that would save Britain. In 1934, he'd watched his first attempt at a modern fighter, the Type 224, fail spectacularly. It was underpowered, ungainly, and slow. Mitchell had perhaps 2 years to live. He spent them creating perfection. The Spitfire prototype flew on March 5, 1936. Test pilot Joseph Mutt Summers landed after 8 minutes and reportedly said, "Don't touch anything." The aircraft was right from the first flight. The elliptical wing, the shape that would become iconic, wasn't chosen for aesthetics. Mitchell's calculations showed it provided the minimum drag for the maximum lift. The thin wing profile, just 13% thickness to chord ratio, was revolutionary. German wings were 16 to 18% thick. Those few percentage points meant everything in combat. The original Spitfire Mark I carried 8 Browning 303 machine guns, 4 in each wing. The Rolls-Royce Merlin 2-engine produced just over 1,000 horsepower. Maximum speed was 362 miles per hour at 19,000 feet. On paper, the Messerschmitt 109E was faster, climbed better, and hit harder with its cannon armament. German intelligence officers studying captured Spitfire reports in 1939 concluded the British fighter was adequate for its time, but lacked development potential. The thin wings couldn't accommodate heavier weapons. The airframe was optimized for the Merlin engine and couldn't accept more powerful plants. The design had reached its limits. They were catastrophically wrong. By September 1940, when the Battle of Britain reached its crescendo, both sides had learned harsh truths. The Messerschmitt 109 could outclimb the Spitfire and outdive it. But in a turning fight, the British fighter revealed advantages that technical specifications couldn't capture. Squadron leader Bob Stanford Tuck, who would finish the war with 29 confirmed kills, described his first dogfight with a 109 over Dover. "He tried to turn with me. Fatal mistake. I pulled inside him in 3 turns. At 200 yards, I gave him a 2-second burst. He came apart like a child's toy." The secret was Mitchell's wing. The elliptical shape distributed lift so evenly that the Spitfire could turn without the vicious stalling characteristics that plagued other fighters. German pilots discovered that their 109s would snap roll if pushed too hard in tight turns. The Spitfire would simply turn tighter. Pilot Officer Colin Gray of 5-4 Squadron, a New Zealander who would claim 27 confirmed victories, remembered the German reaction. After the first month, they stopped trying to dogfight us. They'd make 1 pass, maybe 2, then run for altitude. They learned respect. But the Luftwaffe had numbers. and they had confidence that new variants would restore German superiority. By December 1940, the first Messerschmitt 109Fs were reaching frontline squadrons. Streamlined nose, better visibility, improved handling. German test pilots reported the F model was superior to the Spitfire in all flight regimes. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring told his fighter commanders, "The British have reached the limits of their design. We are just beginning to exploit ours." He was wrong again. At Castle Bromwich Aircraft Factory outside Birmingham, Supermarine's designers were already working on variants that would shock the Luftwaffe. The Spitfire Mark V, entering service in February 1941, featured the Merlin 45 engine producing 1,470 horsepower. Maximum speed increased to 374 miles per hour. Rate of climb jumped by over 30%. More importantly, the wings were strengthened to carry two 20mm Hispano cannon and 4 machine guns. The British fighter that supposedly couldn't be upgunned now hit harder than the Messerschmitt. Oberfeldwebel Heinz Knoch, a Luftwaffe ace, who would survive the war with 33 kills, encountered the Spitfire Mark V over the Channel in June 1941. His diary entry captured German shock. "The English have improved their fighter dramatically. It climbs with us now, turns inside us still, and the cannon fire is devastating. Lieutenant Schmidt's 109 simply exploded when hit. What happened to British industrial weakness?" But German engineers weren't idle. In August 1941, the Focke-Wulf 190 Anton made its combat debut. This was supposed to be the Spitfire killer. The 190 was a brute. Its BMW 801 radial engine produced 1,660 horsepower. It was faster than the Spitfire Mark V at low altitude. It could outdive anything the RAF had. Most terrifying, it mounted 4 20mm cannon and 2 machine guns. The firepower could saw a Spitfire in half. RAF pilots called it the Butcher Bird. Loss rates spiked. In September 1941, Fighter Command lost 91 Spitfires to just 39 Focke-Wulfs. Wing Commander Douglas Bader, Britain's legless ace with 22 confirmed kills, was shot down and captured by Focke-Wulfs over France. Before capture, he radioed, "Jerry's got a new fighter. It's bloody good." The Air Ministry panicked. Emergency meetings discussed whether Spitfire production should be halted in favor of American types. Some staff officers argued Mitchell's design had finally met its match. Then Supermarine's designers did something extraordinary. They didn't replace the Spitfire, they transformed it. The Spitfire Mark IX entered service in July 1942. Same airframe, same wings. But under the cowling sat the Merlin 61, a 2-stage supercharged engine producing 1,515 horsepower. Maximum speed jumped to 408 miles per hour at 28,000 feet. The performance increase was staggering. The Mark IX could climb to 20,000 feet in 7 minutes. The Focke-Wulf needed 9. At altitude, the British fighter was 40 miles per hour faster. The Germans' technical advantage evaporated overnight. Oberleutnant Walter Gülle-Ossau, one of Germany's top aces with over 100 kills, encountered the Mark IX over Abbeville in August 1942. He wrote in his diary, "Impossible. The Spitfire cannot perform like this. Yet it does. We have lost our advantage." German pilots began reporting something even more disturbing. The Spitfire wasn't just faster and higher, it was still outturning everything they had. The Mark IX retained all the dogfighting advantages of earlier Marks while matching or exceeding the Focke-Wulf in every other parameter. Major Gerhard Schöpfel, who commanded Jagdgeschwader 26, filed a report to Luftwaffe headquarters in September 1942. "The British have achieved something we thought impossible. They have improved an obsolete design to match our latest fighters." This suggests either our intelligence was wrong about Spitfire limitations, or British engineering has exceeded all expectations. Recommend immediate investigation. The investigation revealed uncomfortable truths. German engineers had designed fighters to specific performance requirements, optimizing for particular mission profiles. The Messerschmitt was optimized for high-speed interception, the Focke-Wulf for low-altitude combat. Each excelled in its regime but lacked flexibility. The Spitfire's design philosophy was different. Mitchell had created an inherently balanced platform that could be modified for different roles while retaining its core advantages. The elliptical wing worked equally well at sea level and 30,000 feet. The light, responsive controls remained effective across the entire performance envelope. The design had headroom. By 1943, this headroom was saving British lives across multiple theaters. In North Africa, Spitfire Mark V's flown by Desert Air Force pilots dominated the Regia Aeronautica and matched the Luftwaffe. Squadron leader Neville Duke, who would finish with 28 kills, most in North Africa, described the Spitfire's versatility. We'd be flying bomber escort at 25,000 feet in the morning. That afternoon, we'd be ground strafing German columns at 0 feet. Same aircraft, same day. The Spit could do it all. Malta, the most bombed place on Earth, survived partly because 96 Spitfire Mark V's reached the island between March and May 1942. These aircraft, operating from cratered runways with minimal maintenance, defeated sustained German attempts to bomb the island into submission. Flight Lieutenant George Screwball Burling, a Canadian flying from Malta, shot down 27 German and Italian aircraft in 14 days during July 1942, all in a Mark V. He called it the only fighter that could have held Malta. Anything else would have been scrap metal in a week. German frustration mounted. Their latest fighters were being matched by a design now 7 years old. The response was predictable. Build something even better. The Messerschmitt 109, Gustav, entered service in mid-1942. The G6 variant carried more armor, heavier armament, and the DB605 engine producing 1,700 horsepower with boost. On paper, it outperformed the Spitfire Mark IX. In practice, the Gustav was a disappointment. The added weight ruined handling. The high-altitude performance was excellent, but maneuverability suffered. German pilots called it the bump because of the fuselage bulges needed for larger wheels. Hauptmann Hans Assi Hahn, an ace with 108 kills before his capture, flew the Gustav over the Channel in November 1942. He was shot down by squadron leader J.E. Johnny Johnson, who would become Britain's top-scoring fighter pilot with 34 kills, all in Spitfires. After the war, Hahn admitted, "The Gustav was supposed to restore our superiority. It was heavier and less agile than the Friedrich it replaced. Meanwhile, every time we thought we'd match the Spitfire, the British produced a better version." He was right. In March 1943, the Spitfire Mark XII entered service with fighter command squadrons defending against Focke-Wulf hit-and-run raiders. This variant used the Griffin engine, a development of the Merlin with 36% more displacement. Power output was 1,905 horsepower. The Mark XII could reach 374 miles per hour at 18,000 feet and climb there in 6 minutes flat. More importantly, for intercepting low-level raiders, it was the fastest fighter below 10,000 feet on either side. German pilots conducting raids over southern England's coastal towns found themselves caught by Spitfires that were suddenly impossibly faster than their Focke-Wulfs at sea level. Loss rates for German fighter-bomber raids spiked dramatically. Oberleutnant Josef Pips Priller, commanding Jagdgeschwader 26, reported in April 1943, "The Spitfire has again surpassed our capabilities at low altitude. This is the 4th time we have been leapfrogged by variants of an aircraft our intelligence deemed incapable of significant improvement. We need a fundamental reassessment of British capabilities." That reassessment never came. Instead, German industry produced more variants, each supposed to be the Spitfire killer. Each failed. The Focke-Wulf 190 Dora 9, entering service in autumn 1944, was the Luftwaffe's last hope for fighter superiority. The Junkers UMO 213 engine produced 2,240 horsepower. Maximum speed was 426 miles per hour. Initial climb rate was 4,700 feet per minute. On paper, it was the best piston engine fighter Germany produced. The Dora 9 was superb. German pilots loved it. But by the time it reached squadrons in significant numbers, they were facing the Spitfire Mark XIV. The Mark XIV combined the Griffin 65 engine producing 2,050 horsepower with a 5-blade propeller and strengthened airframe. Maximum speed was 448 miles per hour at 26,000 feet. Service ceiling was 43,000 feet. It could climb to 20,000 feet in 5 minutes. Flight Lieutenant Pierre Closterman, a free French pilot flying with the RAF who would claim 33 kills, transitioned to the Mark 14 in January 1945. His memoir described his first combat. "I engaged 4 Dora 9s over the Rhine. The new Focke-Wulf was certainly fast, but the Mark 14 was faster. It climbed better, and it still turned inside them. I shot down 2. The others ran. The surprise on their faces was visible even through their goggles." The mathematics of development told the story. From 1936 to 1945, Spitfire maximum speed increased from 362 miles per hour to 454 miles per hour. Engine power more than doubled from 1,030 horsepower to 2,375 horsepower in the final marks. Armament went from 8 rifle-caliber machine guns to 4 20mm cannon plus rockets or bombs. Yet the basic airframe remained Mitchell's original design. The wings were the same elliptical shape. The fuselage structure was recognizably similar. The control system retained the same basic layout. Somehow, this pre-war design accommodated 9 years of continuous improvement while maintaining the handling characteristics that made it deadly. German fighters couldn't match this evolution. The Messerschmitt 109 saw 10 major variants, but each was a compromise. Improvements in one area came at the cost of another. The later Gustavs were faster but less maneuverable than earlier Emils. The Focke-Wulf's development path hit a dead end. The basic airframe couldn't absorb the power increases needed to match late-war Spitfires. Major Günther Rall, Germany's third highest-scoring ace with 275 kills, mostly on the Eastern Front, flew against Spitfires over Germany in 1944. After the war, he reflected, "We kept hearing that the Spitfire was obsolete, that our new fighters would sweep it from the sky. I shot down many aircraft, but only 3 Spitfires. Each time, it was because I had surprise in altitude. In equal combat, the Spitfire was dangerous until the last day of the war." The numbers supported his assessment. Between January and May 1945, as Germany collapsed, RAF Spitfire squadrons operating over the Reich shot down 412 German aircraft for the loss of 81 Spitfires to enemy action. A kill ratio of better than 5-to-1, achieved with a design that first flew when Hitler was still rebuilding the Wehrmacht. The production statistics revealed another dimension of Spitfire superiority. British factories produced 20,341 Spitfires during the war. Production never stopped. Improvements were incorporated on the production line continuously. Mark 5s became Mark 9s, became Mark 14s without breaking the manufacturing flow. German production was chaotic. The Messerschmitt 109 totaled 34,000 units, but constant modifications disrupted production. Different factories built incompatible variants. Parts shortages plagued the program. The Focke-Wulf 190 achieved just over 20,000 units with similar problems. More tellingly, German fighters were withdrawn and replaced. The 109 Emil gave way to the Franz, then the Gustav. Each replacement took time and resources. The Spitfire simply evolved. Frontline squadrons received new marks as they became available, but older marks remained effective in other roles. Mark 5s that were obsolete over France in 1944 were still useful in Burma. The design's flexibility meant nothing was wasted. This flexibility extended to roles. The Spitfire flew as a fighter, fighter-bomber, photo-reconnaissance platform, and carrier-based naval fighter. The Seafire variants operated from Royal Navy carriers throughout the war. German naval fighters were afterthoughts that never saw significant action. Wing Commander Lance Wade, an American flying with the RAF who claimed 25 kills, described the Spitfire's versatility in a letter home in May 1943. "Today I flew bomber escort, strafed a German airfield, photographed a bridge, and shot down a Machi. 4 different missions, 1 aircraft. The Jerrys need 4 specialized designs to do what the Spit does in an afternoon." The reconnaissance Spitfires deserve particular mention. Stripped of armament, fitted with cameras and extra fuel, they photographed every significant target in occupied Europe. Flying at 40,000 feet or more, often alone, these unarmed Spitfires were virtually uncatchable. German fighters would scramble, climb desperately, and watch the British aircraft pass overhead, too high and too fast to intercept. Flight Lieutenant Tony Hill flew reconnaissance Spitfires over Germany from 1943 to 1945. His aircraft was fired on 174 times. He was never hit. The reconnaissance Spit was the purest expression of Mitchell's genius. Speed, altitude, and that beautiful wing shape. The Germans hated us. They'd scramble entire staffels and never get close. By 1944, Luftwaffe pilots were encountering Spitfires everywhere. Over France, supporting D-Day operations. Over Italy, hammering German positions. Over the Balkans, escorting bombers. Over the Reich itself, where seeing the distinctive elliptical wings over German cities represented the final insult. Hauptmann Heinz Knoke, whose diary became one of the war's most valuable primary sources, wrote in December 1944, "We called them obsolete in 1940. In 1941, we said they'd met their match. In 1942, we claimed our new fighters would destroy them. In 1943, we believed the next variant would restore German superiority. Now it is 1944, and the Spitfire is still killing us. Perhaps we should have spent less time calling it obsolete and more time asking why we couldn't build anything better." The final months of the war brought a curious reversal. German jet fighters, the Messerschmitt 262 and later types, were genuinely superior to any piston engine fighter, yet they appeared too late and in too few numbers to matter, and even jets were vulnerable during takeoff and landing. Squadron leader James "Johnny" Johnson, Britain's top ace, shot down a Messerschmitt 262 on February 9, 1945. He caught it during its landing approach when its speed advantage was nullified. His gun camera footage showed the jet representing the cutting edge of aeronautical technology, destroyed by a fighter design that was nearly a decade old. Johnson's after-action report contained a line that captured the war's irony. Fritz finally built something faster than the Spitfire, took him 6 years, and his most advanced technology, and I still shot him down. The Spitfire's success came from factors beyond pure performance. The Rolls-Royce Merlin and later Griffin engines were masterpieces of reliability. German pilots flew aircraft that required extensive maintenance and broke down frequently. Spitfire pilots could rely on their aircraft to start, fly, fight, and return home mission after mission. Squadron maintenance logs tell the story. A typical Spitfire squadron could put up 12 aircraft from an establishment of 16 day after day. German squadrons with similar paper strength often managed 6 or 8 serviceable aircraft. British ground crews kept their fighters flying through rain, snow, and mud. German maintenance was hamstrung by part shortages and overcomplicated systems. The pilot experience mattered too. British and Commonwealth pilots in 1944 had hundreds of hours of training. They arrived at squadrons knowing their aircraft intimately. They practiced gunnery with real ammunition, something the Luftwaffe could no longer afford. They flew with experienced leaders who taught them how to survive. German pilots in the war's final years arrived at squadrons with minimal training in aircraft that were supposed to be superior, but that they barely knew how to fly. Fuel shortages meant they couldn't practice. Ammunition shortages meant they couldn't perfect their gunnery. And they faced enemies who had been flying Spitfires for years. The psychological impact on German pilots was devastating. Every time the Luftwaffe introduced a fighter that was supposed to defeat the Spitfire, the British simply produced a better Spitfire. The message was clear. No matter what German industry produced, British engineers could match it using an airframe designed in 1936. Oberst Johannes Mackie Steinhoff, who survived the war with 176 kills and became a general in the post-war Luftwaffe, wrote in his memoir, "The Spitfire was a ghost that haunted us. We could never escape it. We could never surpass it. That beautiful elliptical wing appeared everywhere, always, from 1940 to the end. Flying against it was like fighting destiny." The final tally of Spitfire achievements defied the early German predictions. Total production exceeded 20,000 aircraft. Service life lasted from 1938 to 1954, 16 years. Combat victories exceeded 5,700 German, Italian, and Japanese. Aircraft destroyed. Total losses to all causes were approximately 4,000 aircraft, giving a positive kill ratio across the entire war. No other fighter matched this record. The Messerschmitt 109 served longer and was built in greater numbers but required constant replacement of obsolete variants. The Focke-Wulf 190 was excellent, but appeared too late and in insufficient numbers. American fighters like the Mustang and Thunderbolt were outstanding, but didn't enter service until 1943. The Spitfire was there from beginning to end, evolving, adapting, improving. It defended Britain when Britain stood alone. It covered the invasions of North Africa, Sicily, Italy, and France. It fought over Burma and the Pacific. It was the last piston-engine fighter to shoot down a jet in combat. And through all of this, German pilots kept insisting it was obsolete. In May 1945, the war in Europe ended. Luftwaffe fighter pilots who survived surrendered their aircraft and themselves to the Allies. Many were interrogated by intelligence officers seeking to understand how Germany had lost air superiority so completely. Major Eric Brown, a Royal Navy test pilot who interviewed captured German pilots, asked them about their experiences fighting Spitfires. The responses were remarkably consistent. They had underestimated the design's potential. They had believed their own propaganda about British industrial weakness. And they had never quite accepted that an aircraft designed in the mid-1930s was still shooting them down in 1945. Oberst Adolf Galland, commander of Germany's fighter forces for much of the war, and an ace with 104 kills, provided perhaps the most honest assessment in his post-war debriefing. The Spitfire was the greatest Allied fighter of the war, not because it was better than all others on a given day, but because it remained competitive throughout. German fighters peaked and declined. The Spitfire just kept improving. By the war's end, we were flying our latest designs against theirs, and their design was a decade old. That we couldn't build anything decisively better than a 1936 British fighter is the damning verdict on German aeronautical engineering. In 1946, the Royal Air Force held a victory flypast over London. Among the aircraft flying in formation were Spitfire Mark 24s, the final production variant. Powered by Griffon engines producing 2,375 horsepower, they could reach 454 miles per hour and climb to 30,000 feet in 8 minutes. In the crowd watching were veterans of the Battle of Britain, men who had flown Mark 1s 6 years earlier. They saw aircraft that looked almost identical to the ones they'd flown, but that were twice as powerful, 50% faster, and infinitely more capable. The same elliptical wings, the same graceful lines, the same aircraft that German pilots had called obsolete in 1940. Also in the crowd were German prisoners of war awaiting repatriation. Many were former Luftwaffe pilots. They watched the Spitfires pass overhead and perhaps reflected on the years spent insisting the British fighter was outdated, outmatched, and outclassed. Flight Lieutenant Alan Deer, who survived the war with 22 confirmed kills, all in Spitfires, was asked years later about the German insistence that his fighter was obsolete. He laughed. They kept saying it right up until we shot them down. I suppose it was better than admitting they couldn't build anything superior. The truth was simpler and more profound. Reginald Mitchell, dying of cancer, had created something as close to perfection as aircraft design permitted. The elliptical wing wasn't just beautiful, it was fundamentally right. The airframe wasn't just elegant, it was inherently sound. The design wasn't locked into a specific performance envelope. It was adaptable to anything engineers could imagine. German aircraft designers were skilled, knowledgeable, and innovative. They created excellent fighters, but they were solving individual problems with specific solutions. Mitchell had solved the fundamental problem of fighter design so completely that his solution remained valid for nearly a decade of rapid technological advancement. The Spitfire didn't defeat German fighters through superior speed or firepower or altitude performance. It defeated them through superior adaptability. Every time German engineers thought they'd created a decisive advantage, Supermarine's designers found a way to match or exceed it using Mitchell's basic design. The airframe that supposedly had no development potential absorbed engine upgrades that more than doubled power output. The wings that supposedly couldn't carry heavy weapons ended up mounting 4 20mm cannon plus bombs and rockets. The design that supposedly couldn't be improved remained in production throughout the war, while German fighters came and went. At the RAF Museum in Hendon, a Spitfire Mark I from the Battle of Britain sits near a Mark 24 from war's end. Visitors can compare them directly. The family resemblance is unmistakable, but the specifications tell the story of evolution that German designers never matched. Mark I, 1,030 horsepower, 362 miles per hour, 8 machine guns. Mark 24, 2,375 horsepower, 454 miles per hour, 4 20mm cannon. Same wings, same basic structure, same aircraft that Oberleutnant Franz von Very had called obsolete over Kent in September 1940. Von Wera survived that encounter with Alan Deer and later escaped from Canadian captivity, making it back to Germany. He was killed in October 1941 when his Messerschmitt 109's engine failed over the Netherlands. He was 27. His final combat missions had been flown against Spitfire Mark V's, the variant that proved the British fighter could match and exceed the improved Messerschmitt Franz. Before his death, von Vera reportedly told fellow pilots, "The English have done something remarkable with that fighter. We should stop calling it obsolete." By then, German pilots were learning what British and Commonwealth pilots had known from the beginning. The Spitfire wasn't perfect. It had weaknesses, but it was good enough, day after day, year after year, variant after variant. And in war, good enough repeated consistently beats perfection attempted once. The final Spitfires were retired from frontline RAF service in 1954. By then, jets had replaced piston engine fighters entirely, but for 18 years, Mitchell's design had served continuously, outlasting every contemporary and successor the Germans produced. The elliptical wings that German pilots mocked in 1940 were still flying in defense of Britain 14 years later. The obsolete fighter that wasn't supposed to survive past 1941 was shooting down enemy aircraft over Korea in 1951. The design that had no development potential spawned 24 major variants and dozens of subtypes. German pilots had called it outdated. They were wrong. The Spitfire wasn't outdated, it was timeless, and that made all the difference.